Welcome back to the Everything Property Podcast. Now, unless you have been living under a rock in the property and development space, you would have heard that the low and mid-rise housing policy has just been announced. And I thought, who better to get on the podcast than our friend Elie Sleiman from es.au to run through the opportunities of this incredible new policy, to talk through it, to get the ins and out of it. Elie, you've joined us before, but welcome to the Everything Property Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, good. Thanks
What's
for having
been
me.
happening?
Just been busy just with all these new changes that have come across and in the environment for everyone, what's happening with these changes. So thought I'm happy to cover them with you and your people.
Perfect, man. Well, look, talk us a little bit through it. So for the normal, we've got some property investors, we've got some property developers in our audience. Talk to us a little bit about the LMR policy, what it is, who it affects, how it's sort of come into fruition.
Okay, so it covers the entire state of New South Wales in 171 locations. So 171 train stations and major shopping precincts were picked, and then anything within 800 metres walking distance of those locations. So if there's a shopping precinct, it's the outskirts of the actual shopping precinct. If it was a train station, it's the entry to that train station, and 800 metres walking distance. So if you're measuring the walking distance, it's literally no one would walk diagonally across the road. So they'd be measuring, if it's a public access way, they'd be walking through. And they to actually measure the 800, and anything that's zoned R1, R2, R3, or R4 has been impacted by the changes. And the only other exclusions to that within the 800 metres walking distance is if your property had been listed as a TOD in the TOD precinct, which is Transport Oriented Development. So some of these places, as an example, Bankstown Council, they've got like almost 600-700 metres worth of TOD precinct, which leaves them with almost nothing left for the LMR.
But the TOD precinct is a greater increase in height and density compared to this?
It is, but the difference is the TOD thing's asking for a 21-metre frontage in order to activate it. So I've got a client who's sitting literally on the edge of the TOD, and had he been next door, he'd be 6 stories, but he just doesn't have the 21-metre frontage. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So, look, there is obviously the LMR mapping stuff online that people can go in and potentially have a look at their address or the sites that they're looking at. You said it R1 to R4, it does affect. How does it affect it, and what are the changes that we can now do on those sorts of houses zoned, R1 to R4 within 800 metres?
The best way to look at it is the R1s and the R2s are getting treated the same, and the R3s and the R4s are getting treated the same.
Yep.
All of them
Sorry, R1 and 2 grouped together, R3 and 4 grouped
together. Yeah. So whether you're R3 or R4, you're the same, and whether you're R1 or R2, you're practically the same. Mm-hmm. And across all the LMR areas, if you're in that area, you get dual occupancies permissible in the zone. You get multi-dwelling housing permissible in the zone. You get multi-dwelling housing terraces permissible in the zone, and you also get residential flat buildings permissible in the zone. And so that even goes for the R1 and R2 blocks. So low density residential now, you can start to put a residential flat building on there. Now, there are height differences and FSR controls that change. And so state governments put in non-refusal standards to control what sort of happens in those zones. So if you're doing a dual lock, you get given 65% with a maximum height of
65%
FSR.
Explain, let's break it down as well. Explain for people that don't understand the FSR and how that works.
All right, so FSR is the gross floor area divided by the site area. Gross floor area is the inside face of external enclosing walls, not adding voids, adding the stairs once, not including balconies, patios, areas that aren't enclosed with wall heights higher than 1.4, and that area there, and excluding car parking to meet the consent authority's requirements, and then also ventilation shafts. There's a few exclusions, but generally what I've covered is the bulk of it. That area there, divided by the site area, can't be more than 65%. Otherwise, you'd be in breach of the control. Now, that is called a non-refusal standard. So if you by chance have a council that allows 70%, you can still propose 70. But if your council asks for 50 and you propose 64, 65, they wouldn't have grounds to refuse you for floor space ratio.
Okay. So essentially, 1,000 square metre site means I can build 650 gross floor area of whatever I'm developing on that.
Perfect.
65%. Okay, perfect.
Yep. And so that's happening in the R1 and R2 zones. And so you get a height of 9.5 metres. which is essentially 2 stories in attic, 3 stories in height.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as you move across to the R3 and R4, there's the concept of inner circle and outer circle. So R1 and R2 is just 800 meters walking distance, and as long as you're not in that Todd precinct.
Mm-hmm.
And then R3 is the inner circle is 0 to 400 meters. That's the inner circle. And then you got the outer LMR circle, which is the 400 to 800 meter mark. And if you're in the inner circle,
yep,
you get 6 stories, and you get a 2.2 maximum floor space ratio. So it's 220% of the land size.
Wow.
And for residential flat buildings, you get given 22 meters in height. If you happen to have shop top housing permissible in the zone, doesn't force into the zone. Should it be permissible in the zone, then you can do shop top housing, and you're given a height of 24 meters, an extra 2 more meters
mm-hmm,
in that inner circle. Then you got the outer circle.
What's the distance of the inner circle?
0 meters from
like from the train station or from the town centre?
Yeah, so from 0 to 400 is the
Yep.
inner circle. 400 to 800 is the outer circle.
I think the main opportunity does lie between 400 and 800, because let's face it, anything within 400, it's going to be really hard to find a site that hasn't been sort of picked up or
Correct.
or touched yet. So
Correct.
I personally see that second inner circle as a really big opportunity. So talk to us about, and that circle is R1 and R2.
So if you get R3 and R4 in the outer circle, you then go to that next bracket where you get given a 1.5 FSR, so 150% of the land,
mm-hmm,
and 17.5 meter height, which is equivalent to 4 stories. That is the non-refusal standard. Now,
for the second ring up to 800?
For the second ring, yeah. And the interesting thing is for the R1 and R2s, all they're saying for a residential flat building is 12 meters, 500 square meters, which is quite easy to get for most blocks. The problem lies is you need it's class 2, and a lot of people crunching the numbers for class 2, as most developers will be aware, they're not sort of stacking up, and it's quite a delay in the process. So
run us through building classes as well for someone that doesn't know what a class 2 building is. Sorry to be annoying, but
that's fine.
I'm just thinking about this from the average Joe.
I'm more than happy to cover it. Yeah, more than happy. So if you have a granny flat or a house or a freestanding dwelling, that's a class 1A. If that granny flat decides to be placed over on top of the house, it will trigger off class 2. So as soon as there's a dwelling on top of another dwelling, it becomes class 2. So if I had a dual occupancy with a party wall in the middle and no dwelling on top of the dwelling, that's a class 1A, and each one's a class 1A. If I choose to build the dual lock with one on top of the other, that becomes a class 2. Mm-hmm. And if I have 10,000 townhouses side by side with party walls, they're still class 1As. It only becomes class 2 once it sprawls over, or I have what would be class 1As, but the simple fact of having a communal basement underneath. Mm-hmm. So a townhouse complex is one of the typical ones that people miss. So I've got people with a really steep site saying, hey, I want to do townhouses here, and it's sort of forcing a communal basement because of the steepness of the site. All good, we do it, and you then end up with basement underneath, and the basement then triggers off the class 2. As soon as you're class 2, then 900 mil separation to the boundary for openable for windows changes to 3 meters before the fire rating kicks in. You then need disabled access from the front entry, from the boundary to the front entry door. Mm-hmm. And when you've got a steep site, you can imagine how much disabled ramps are going on in that space.
Yeah, and you also open yourself up to DBP, right?
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of stuff that triggers off, and sometimes developers will let go of one unit in the complex to stick to class 1A, so they don't go into the complexities of the class 2.
Yeah. I think good point. So essentially apartment buildings and shared basements, class 2. For those listening at home and trying to think about it, class 2 is there's a whole lot of more issues in terms of build, prices, ramifications with that. So if you can stick to class 1, a lot more advantageous to build, speed, and being able to get in, get out really quickly. You're not you're sort of not in that DBP. What that is the Design Building Practitioners Act, which was an act that was built in a couple of years ago, which pretty much every consultant these days, Elie, correct me if I'm wrong, hates, because it it adds a lot more red tape and paperwork to the building and design process. So there's a lot more things that need to sort of be signed off and checked. So when you go down that route, you open yourself up to a lot more time, a lot more effort, a lot more costs. And as you said, as Elie sort of mentioned, is that you don't have that, a lot of those projects sort of start to get cut down and don't have that fat in it anymore.
Yep.
So apologies, segue, that's building classes. So back to that second ring.
Yep.
Class 1A and Class 2?
Yep. So if you're in an R1, R2, you can do residential flat building, but you're limited to 2-story plus attic or 3 stories in height, not 9.5 meters.
Okay. Not terrible.
Yeah.
But also there's opportunity there.
Yeah.
What else regarding...
Okay, yeah. So there's been a lot of confusion in the state. When they launched the code,
yeah,
I couldn't keep up with the phone calls of everyone calling me for their 12-metre wide site, 450 square metres, and they said it applies to the whole state of New South Wales. I said it applies to the whole state of New South Wales for permissibility in the R2 zone. Mm-hmm. So it forced dual occupancies, the code forced dual occupancies into the R2 zone. That was part of the stage 1 reforms. So, and then part of the stage 2 reforms, they grabbed it out of another the location they put it in, and they moved it into Chapter 6, which is the new chapter they moved it into. Mm-hmm. And then it said if you're in a low and mid-rise area and people weren't reading that properly, you then get the 12 metres 450. So you have to be inside the low and mid-rise area. There's 171 locations to have a dual
within
occupancy.
800?
Yeah.
Yep.
To do a dual occupancy with a 12-metre wide frontage, 450 square metres.
Okay.
Yep.
And if you're outside of that?
Outside of that, you're just all bets are off and you're in the normal council realm. So whatever your local council needed is whatever the local council. If they ask for 15 metres 600, then it's 15 metres 600.
Okay. So there's opportunities for duplex sites within that 800 for 12 and 450 size blocks?
Correct.
Okay. What else?
Terraces is another interesting one. They're allowing them on an 18-metre wide site, so 6 metres in width per terrace, with only 500 square metres of land. So then on top of that, you've also got townhouses, so not street-facing dwellings. So terraces are 3 or more for street-facing like multi-dwelling housing.
Yep.
And then you've got just typical multi-dwelling housing, which is the townhouses and villas that most people are sort of used to seeing, which is units behind units. They only need a 12-metre wide frontage, surprisingly, and 600 square metres of land. So they're sort of working off 1 per 200 square metres to fit. The interesting thing is with that is in order to the state government sort of released it with non-refusal standards, but each council's open to grab their development control plan and go, our development control plan says 6 metre side setbacks. And if I've got a 12-metre wide site, what am I doing? I've got nothing left in the middle. So I'm now putting in variations that are going to be acceptable. Now, there's a bit of talk in the industry saying that all bets are off with the DCP, but what are we using then, and what's So I think there's going to be a few applications heading to court, and it's going to be bashed out. And I personally think they should have brought out a code that sort of fit that criteria, because one council will ask for 12 square metres of principal private open space, one will ask for 60 square metres. And if you got a council that's asking for 100 square metres, so as an example, if I lodge a dual occupancy in Parramatta, they ask for 100 square metres minimum 6x6 for your actual courtyard. Mm-hmm. And so I come to them with a small site, and half my site is allocated to courtyard now.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, correct. So it's going to be interesting to see how some of these councils take the applications, especially with side setbacks and the like. Some of them have maximum wall height, and they'll say, well, the non-refusal standards are 9.5 metres maximum building height. Wall height's not a control that's being trumped. It was one of the ones that happened when boarding houses were out. There was so many court cases, but as you know, some of these councils don't care. It's like, take us to court.
Yeah. Waste time and waste money.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the opportunity, the CDCs, where we can bypass council, you're talking mainly those townhouse sites are going to be under DA, right?
Okay, yeah. So there's been a massive confusion. I don't think anyone's been able to clear it up. Where, as you know, we specialise in that CDC space. So the changes that took place in relation to CDC, so everything I just spoke to you now is DA world.
Yep.
when you come into CDC world, the only thing that's taken place is the permissibility. It's forced in an R3 zone. You may have a council that never allowed dual locks in an R3. It's forcing you and it's allowing you to lodge a CDC in an R3 zone. Mm-hmm. If you're R2 and it was prohibited, that's still on hold. Okay. Councils are still working that out. It's only the R2s that are on hold. If you get me an R1, it was prohibited, it's forced it in. I can now consider doing CDC in those zones as well. And then the other thing is too, is I must follow what the local council is asking for the area. So in the LMR, I'm allowed to go 450. If the council in the R2 zone is asking for 600, I then need 600 for my CDC. I don't get the opportunity to go to 450.
Okay.
However, there's a bit of a glitch in the code. Well, not a glitch. It's an opportunity. And I know you like to go to Golden Nuggets. So yeah. Some of your viewers may forward to the very end for the Golden Nugget. This Golden Nugget will come in the middle.
Yeah.
If you were to locate a site in an R1 or R3 where it's currently prohibited, in an LMR area, everyone's looking for a 450 site, and if someone gets a 440 site, they're discarding it, or a 401 square meter site, they're discarding it. In the 400, so if you found a council where R1 or R3 was prohibited for a dual occupancy, the LMR then makes it permissible. CDC then says the minimum lot size specified in an environmental planning instrument, and it starts to reference the thing, but it says, but not in an LMR area, and it excludes it for the R2 zone. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't exclude it for R3 or R1. And then it says, if nothing is specified, then 400. And then all of a sudden, you were doing CDC less than you could do a DA for in at 400. Now, in those scenarios, you'd end up with strata subdivision, not Torrens title, but still relatively okay. It's possible, depending on the council, you could still end up with Torrens as well.
Torrens on less than 450?
So if you're doing a DA, the minimum lot size for subdivision for a dual lock is 225. Mm-hmm. But if you were to break past, because you're going to the 400 realm, you can't use that code anymore. And so you're in the CDC realm, so you're using part 6 of the code set, which is the subdivision.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you can potentially still get a site. What's the minimum site size for that though? 400?
400, yeah. But it's really important. Someone needs to check it. Like, don't just go on prohibit it and jump on it, because some of these councils have gone as far as saying the size for, so it'd be prohibited in the zone, in the R3, and it's permissible in the R2, as an example. But their wording will say 600 square meters required for our residential zones. So it's covering it. So you can't sneak through anymore. It has to say in the R2 zone, it's 600 square meters. It's then been silent on the R3 zone.
Okay. So
it needs to be checked. So don't just go willy-nilly grabbing stuff and stuff. But the thing is there is gaps in the matrix. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, true. I think the probably preface I'll put to this, as I do and a lot of other people do, is, and not to plug you, but Elie and his team are the type of guys to be able to review that site, get it back to you very quickly and tell you what is permissible. So if you're sort of following along today, you're picking up a couple of different ways that you think you can maybe get something through. A site comes up, you think, oh, this sounds like what we're talking about. You've done a couple of checks. I would recommend sending it to Elie to have a look and just get a second opinion, because you don't want to be pulling the trigger, especially people that don't have an extensive planning and design background like yourself, Elie. Yeah. Couple of big purchases, a lot of money on the line, is to get that that second opinion before pulling the trigger.
Yeah. And a really important thing to cover is not just because you're within those 800-meter walking distance, there are a lot of exclusions that need to be considered.
What are some?
So, and these are the dangerous ones. So people are grabbing sites and they're saying, well, I'm in the zone, and they may have a little corner of their site in a bushfire prone that makes the land bushfire. The code says if your land is bushfire prone, you're excluded, site wiped out, whole code in the bin. Mm-hmm. Your 6 stories now is back to whatever council was telling you if you're an R3 or R4 zone. Same thing with the dual lock. Dual locks, all bets are off for that 450 12-meter frontage. If you are in the Hawkesbury, Nepean or Georges River catchment areas and you're flood prone, and that could mean that your probable maximum flood, so it's not even the 1 in 100-year flood, just any form of flooding, you are then deemed flood-prone land, and if you're flood-prone land in those two massive catchments, like I'm talking the Sydney as we know it generally is in those catchments, you're struck out. So people are asking us, can this? I can't check without a Section 10.7 planning certificate. You need the contract for sale. Get that, send that across, because I can't check if you're flood-prone. Not every single council puts flood maps on.
Yep.
And
this was going to be my next question for some pen. You can flick. There's a couple of platforms online where you can flick some of these filters on, but what's the best option for someone if they've got a site or they're thinking that this ticks the boxes and they just want to do this next level of DD?
Okay, so if they type in spatial viewer, SPATIAL, spatial viewer on the planning portal, the website will open up, and that sort of, for New South Wales, helps check zoning, building heights, which council area you're in, and it can check a few of those layers, heritage, which is another layer. So had you been heritage listed, you're struck out from the code.
Mm-hmm. What about heritage conservation?
That's a very interesting one. So at the moment now, heritage conservation isn't. You can still proceed. My suggestion, if you end up in a situation where you've got heritage conservation, probably don't look at dual occupancy per se. You remember we're lodging this as a DA now, can't be CDC because of the heritage conservation. Mm-hmm. We're up against council's heritage assessor, and if they decide to, I'm not saying that you can't get it done. It's just the amount of work to get it done and the headache to get it done. Those sites there may be more sensible to consider multi-dwelling housing, because all you need is a 12-metre wide frontage, 600 square metres of land, which most properties sort of can fit into.
And you still get it done.
And then
DA.
What you do is you keep the dwelling at the very front, untouched. Don't bother me about my heritage. Just renovate that, and then driveway down the side. If most heritage houses have a gap, they don't have a garage there. They generally got a gap, and then you can put 2, 3, 4, whatever dwellings towards the rear. And that way, the heritage matters box ticked, and then 3 dwellings generally in that space will start to function as a site.
Yep.
You can do dual locks and you can do residential flat building. You can do. It's just you now have to contend with council and the heritage, and that's a Pandora's box. That's anything goes in that space.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Okay, so I just want to sort of summarise and be making notes of this as we go through. So, if you're in heritage listed, forget about it. If it's heritage conservation potential, however, it is a DA route.
Correct.
CDC route, if you are and you check spatial viewer, you come up against things like bushfire overlay or flooding overlay. Again, wipes it out from doing CDC.
Yep. It's not every single area of flood prone. So there are certain council areas flood prone, and the Hawkesbury and the Nepean and Georges River catchment area.
Okay.
The scariest one,
tell me,
is 200 metres from a relevant pipeline. And
we were talking about this the other day.
This is so dangerous.
Yes.
All right. So as soon as the code came out, our office quickly started making contact, trying to get hold of where all these pipes are. And it's like, sorry, it's a national security risk. We can't disclose. We've only told the local councils where they are. And I'm like, we're going to, like, our client may be trying to put together this whole DA package to have this hidden pipe that nobody knows that it's underground, to be told, thank you for lodging this application. It's been in council now for the last 9 months, and we just woke up yesterday and found this pipe that's 192 metres away, and this code's no longer applicable to you. And that's the most concerning one. And so I can understand whatever logic they've had, but the fact that it's not available to the developer to be able to work out is concerning. So you can do a dial before you dig, but each of these pipes has like a license number, and there's like 35 in the state, and we're still trying to piece together how to know that this pipe is that relevant pipe.
But it's within 200 metres.
200 metres is such. It's actually, it sounds like close, but it's a lot.
You can't do a dial before you dig and pick all that up. Yeah, so how do you? Is there any way you can safeguard?
Well, you can do the dial before you dig. You can, and you put the radius in, say 250 metres away from the site. It picks up stuff. But whether that pipe is, so as an example, I had a client going to auction in Beverly Hills.
Yep.
And I checked for them, and I said to them, they did a dial before you dig, and they found this looked like a significant gas pipe running along the train line. And I'm like, if this is one of the things, this is a disaster, because the train lines is where they've activated everything. So they've just wiped out 200 meters of every single site of everyone for this.
Which is where you're meant to put the high density.
And I'm not saying it's there, but I'm like we're now still trying to piece together. We're contacting all these authorities. There's an overarching governing body that manages it.
Mm-hmm.
We've made contact with them. We're waiting to see what information we get back. But out of all the options, that's the only one that's like extremely dangerous to go near. And so any time we're giving clients advice on proceeding with the site, it's like, please do a dial before you dig. So there's the Department of Planning have put out a circular, and in it they've mentioned the 35 stations, and they've mentioned the local government areas it applies to. That's about as close as you get to getting a bit of transparency on where they are. So
is this for the DA sites or CDC? Can you get it through?
This is for the
Or is this
the LMR area. You're trying to activate
any LMR area.
So if you're trying to activate permissibility.
Yep.
So permissibility for the purposes of LMR.
Wow.
So it's for CDC. So
okay.
Yeah, but if dual locks were permissible, you don't need the LMR area at all. You're still doing dual lock because it's asking for the area that council asked for anyway. So if they needed 650, then it's 650, not 450. So you're not relying on LMR for it. But if you were relying on it for the purpose of permissibility, so you're in an R3 zone and you wanted to do a dual lock and council prohibited it, you would want the LMR provisions ticked off, and that 200 meters from a relevant pipe would strike it out.
Yeah, right. That's a tricky one.
Yes.
There's no way around it, right? Keep us updated, please, because it sounds like you guys are working through it. But
we're hoping that councils get asked to put them in the Section 10.7s, saying they're not disclosing that there's where the pipe is, just that it's within.
Yeah, tick yes or no, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so to go back to where we kind of kicked this off was the other issues and the DD on the site. We can look at the spatial viewer, but then we also go back and have a look at the 10.7. So for anyone that doesn't know what a 10.7 is, obviously it's a certificate, it's bundled in the contract of sale, or you can order one off your local council for a few $100 if you're really serious. Is there anything else we need to be checking on 10.7s and that overlays biodiversity?
Biodiversity doesn't knock it out. It's just something that needs to be considered. It doesn't even knock out CDC. You can still proceed as a CDC in a biodiversity area. You just have limitations on what trees can be removed. So some of the exempt species of trees that are further than 3 meters away from the development can't be removed. But the overarching control for trees less than 8 meters is broken past when you're doing it. So if you got terrestrial biodiversity and you got a tree that's 7 meters high, you can remove it via the CDC as long as it's within 3 meters. But
is that of a current dwelling or a proposed?
Of a proposed dwelling. Proposed. So you're proposing a CDC where you're proposing the building.
Yep.
You can remove the tree, but unlike normal CDC, if the tree is like 10 meters high or 25 meters high, if it was exempt species, you're allowed to remove it. No problems, you can remove it. But because the bulk of councils, not every single council, but the bulk of councils within their biodiversity zones will actually go as far as saying, in our biodiversity areas, all bets are off, no such thing as exempt removal. You just got to see us for everything. And once you got to see them for everything, I can no longer remove the 25 metre high exempt tree via CDC, and then I get blocked from being able to propose anything in that zone.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
It's cooked.
Yeah. And so back to what I was talking to you guys about with for the CDC. So that was dual locks. And so dual locks goes and references the code. Then you got the same thing happening with terraces. So out of all the options, you got dual lock, multi-dwelling housing terraces, residential flat building, and then shop-top housing. Of them, the only two things that are permissible via CDC are dual locks and multi-dwelling housing terraces. There are no other. You can't do townhouses CDC. You can't do residential flat building CDC. So I've had a lot of clients trying to do, and I said, no, only those two options. Once you go into the terraces scenario, even though the LMR asks for 18 meters and 500 square meters, once you go into CDC world, you still need the 21 meters that's required.
21 meters of frontage. Why? Tell us.
Because the CDC Part 3B, which we're in the code SEP, in SEP exempt and complying development 2008, that Part 3B in that code doesn't it doesn't allow you to reference any other width from any other policy. It goes as far as saying the minimum area specified in an environmental planning instrument that applies to the land, and it says except Chapter 6 of the Housing SEP, which is the new changes that came past from the LMR provisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so you still need the minimum area that the council needs if you're in the area. If it's permissible in the zone and council's got it. So if council says we need 1,800 square metres, you will still need 1,800 square metres. So as an example, Hills Shire, if you're trying to do terraces there and you're in an R3 zone, they actually ask for 1,800 square metres.
Ridiculous.
So if you're trying to do CDC in an LMR, you will need 21 metres frontage, 1,800 square metres to be able to propose CDC terraces in that zone.
Yeah.
If you were in an R2 zone, we'll cover that one with the golden nugget.
Yeah, okay.
And so what actually happens is you still need the 21 metre frontage, purely because in Part 3B, the next thing it says is the frontage for terraces under this code is 21 metres. It doesn't allow you to reference the 18 metres anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But truth be told, like I've got a client now who's got a 18 metre wide site, 540 square metres, so just a bit more above entry level. We're coming to use the code now as a DA.
Oof. And,
by the time you try to squeeze everything in, it's like extremely, extremely entry-level living. And it's a little bit concerning because you got 18 metres in width. You then would think that because you're going 1.5 metre side setbacks or 900 setback, whatever the council is going to allow,
mm-hmm.
You would then think you could divide that mass by 3, so that you get the 1, 2, 3, terraces. But the code then reads each lot must be minimum 6 metres wide. So the two dwellings on either side have to be, this council needed 1.5 metre side setbacks. I've got 1.5. I've only got a 4.5 metre wide dwelling. By the time I add wall thicknesses, my terrace is 4 metres wide. And by the time I put a garage, I've got this entry-level entry. And it's you don't want to propose it less than 6 because you're then breaching past the non-refusal standards. And then you think to yourself, will council use that as a mechanism to actually refuse my application? And so you sort of stick tight to the 6 metres because the council can't touch you at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 6 metres, if you're doing terrace under CDC, general rule of thumb, sticks to 6 metres frontage per terrace.
Plus
setbacks.
Setbacks. So if you are not a corner block, the general rule is -3 from the number and divide by 6, and that's how many terraces you'll get. So if you were a 30 metre frontage, you would -3, you'd get with 27. 27 divided by 6, you'd get 4. Yeah, so that would be a 4 site for the CDC. For DA, you just divide by 6 for a normal standard lot. So in an LMR area.
In an LMR area. There's opportunities there. There's it's got me really interested.
Oh, sorry, important.
Yeah.
Okay. They then also have another overarching control for 165 square metres per lot for subdivision.
Okay.
For the terraces. So even though you might divide, you got to do a double check. You got to check the frontage and also the area, and both
because you might not have the depth.
It's whatever your weakest link is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 165 total area per terrace?
Per terrace for Torrens title subdivision in LMR area.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think you can propose strata subdivision.
I mean, I'm just thinking about quick numbers. Yeah. If I'm putting 3 on there, 165 each is 480, 500 square metres.
Yeah.
So I've got to have 500 metres of space on that corner block.
Yeah, correct. So you need, if you multiply 165 by 3, it ends up being like 5 square metres short, so 495. But they ask for 500. So one block gets the 500. As soon as you go to a corner block, you then have a secondary road frontage, and that becomes compromising. So you just need to factor in, like, I just told you 18 metres. If you're 18 metres on a corner, and I just finished the standard lot, I'm struggling. Imagine now a corner lot, instead of having 1.5, they ask for 3. You've got extremely tight living.
What about one thing I always tell people about corner blocks is that not all corner blocks are created equal in terms of that primary street frontage being like you might have heaps of space. So let's go for an example. I've got a 30 metre frontage. I get really excited, -3, 27, I can put 4 across there. But the depth of that block that I need, because some corner blocks are like square in shape, some are rectangular, skinny rectangular.
Good.
How are people trying to calculate building footprint? Because once I use a corner block, let's say it's a long rectangle, and the longer side is obviously on the corner side and it's not on the normal street fronting sides where the original house is. How do I work out then my setbacks?
Okay, good. Your setbacks, how much do you love your listeners? Are we giving them more golden nuggets or what are we doing with them?
Yeah, I mean, give me a bit and I'll tell you if it's worth keeping in or if it's too good, we can take it out.
You can take it out. All right. When you're in CDC world, you're using the code CEPS definitions. And in part 1.5, it's got definitions that are to apply. If you...
Code CEP is in...
the exempt and compliant codes. They call it the code CEP because there's multiple codes in there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a housing code, there's a low-rise housing diversity code, there's a rural housing code, there's multiple codes. They call it the code CEP. And in it, they've got, under clause 1.5, they've got definitions that sit there and they say in the event that you can't find the definition here, go to the standard instrument LEP, which is what 99% of councils' definition reads.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the event that there's a word that's there that trumps, let me start again. You go through those definitions. If it's a new word, then you take on that definition, not its natural meaning. If it's a word that sits in council's LEP as well, and it's the exact same word, you then take precedence for that word. Now, building line's one of them. So, in DA world, there's the concept of setback and building line. They treat it almost the same line. Mm-hmm. So your building line is at the setback line. The hardest thing people struggle to get their head around is in CDC world, you have a setback line and you have a building line, the two separate lines. Mm-hmm. The building line is where you choose to put your wall and where you choose. So if you end up with a corner block, in DA world, your 18 metre frontage measures along the primary road frontage for the bulk of councils.
Yep.
So they're going to be measuring 18 metres. In CDC world...
Oh, no, I know what you're going to say. Bullshit.
Okay, I can go... I'm on a corner block and I'm now going to go down the whole length of that block and I get 37 metres. Okay? And then all of a sudden you've activated a whole lot of terraces. Now, CDC gets dangerous at the 900 metre mark. So as soon as you hit up from 600 square metres terraces up until 900 metres, you have...
Once you go over 600 square metre block?
You need 600 to do terraces under CDC. It's the minimum. You can't do it. It doesn't matter even if council allowed less. CDC starts at 600 terraces. 600 up until 899, all you need is a 3 metre reset back for ground and an actual 8 metre reset back for first.
Hard.
Once you go 900 square metres and more, they then ask for a 5 metre reset back and a 12 metre reset back for first.
Wow.
So your ground's 5 metres and your first is... And so... It's extremely punishing on a corner block because you've taken the narrow.
But why would that happen on a block that's a bigger size? Doesn't make sense.
I had a client and I said to him, donate 20 square meters to your neighbor, you'll get 5 terraces, and if you don't, you get nothing. So he got left in a predicament thinking, I was going to give...
Did he do a boundary realignment?
Well, I've left him. That was about 3 months ago. I gave him that advice.
Wait. Let's dig into this. That is incredible. One thing I love about Elie is that there is not another person I have met on this earth yet in development that knows the strategy of how to do things properly. I mean, the Bronte project is a story for another day, but you're saying here, because his site was 900...
Is 920. Yeah.
Because he goes over that 900 mark, it then means that the townhouses that he's doing on that corner block you have to come off 5 metres off the back fence.
Yeah, because of CDC, we use the building line across the longer edge, which gave us more terraces. Mm-hmm. At 3 metres ground floor setback and 8 metres, it works. It fits in, it works.
Yeah. So you need some depth there because the 8 metres of the second story is usually what kills you. Because if your block depth is only 10 metres and you've got to come off 8 metres, you don't have it.
So to help everyone get their heads around what number is the critical number, you'll need 15 metres as a minimum block with to start to function. Like, and I'm talking your entry level.
Okay.
You shouldn't be getting anything less than 18 metres.
15 metres. Basically depth of that
from
longer...
what the primary road frontage that council calls primary road, all the developers would know as primary road frontage. It can function at 15 in an R3 zone. Okay. If you bring me in an R2 zone, it will not function, and I'll tell you why. I'll do the numbers with you. In an R3 zone, let's call it 15 metres wide.
Yep.
R3 CDC, it forces the building line to be at 3.5. It does not communicate with the average neighbour's setbacks, which is what most CDC does.
Okay.
So most CDC doing a house is average setback of neighbours. It might be 10 metres and 8 metres. You're then 9. That's what you do for a house, for a duplex, for things. Terraces says you are R3. You are doing terraces. You are 3.5. Doesn't matter what your neighbours are doing. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you then go into that 3.5.
Yep.
You then have 8 metres from the back for the first floor.
Yep.
Okay. And what does that leave you with? 8 and 3.5.
That's 11. So you
11
got
and a
4.
half. 11 and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and so I've got 3.5 left. If I put brick veneer walls, I've got 250 and I've got 250, and all I'm left with is exactly 3 metres. In order for me to sign my design verification statement as an accredited building designer, I must say that the bedroom is 3 metres in width. So 15 metres is the entry level number for an R3 block. But you're now talking, I'm getting up a set of stairs and I've got bedroom on the left and bedroom on the right, and that's it. That's all I've got.
Yeah.
And you need more than 6 metres in width. And so 18 metres, ideally 20 metres in width in one way is what you should be looking for if you're looking for a corner block.
Okay. And so the strategy to come back was, you said that because that pushes over the 900 pushes him over, if the owner of that block did a boundary, went to his neighbour, theoretically,
yes,
said, hey, I'm developing next door. I need to do a boundary realignment and give you square meterage to make your block bigger. I won't charge you. I'll cover the costs.
Yep.
To drop that site size back under 900.
Correct.
It would then make that project stack up more because all the setbacks decrease.
Correct. And
that's unbelievable.
Yeah. So
I actually don't think that people understand the brilliance of that.
Yeah, I get
thinking.
I get so many clients going.
Everyone would take, if you had a block, if you had a 600 square meter corner block and a 900 square meter block, 99% of people would take that 900 meter square.
Yes, yeah. Correct.
They'll take that every day of the week, but they don't understand.
Yeah, if you're going CDC.
You're going CDC, which is what we're going to do if we've got the corner block anyway.
Yeah, correct.
Elie, man, every time, bro, every time I meet with you, man, you just give knowledge after knowledge chunks.
Yeah.
Okay, so corner blocks. In R2, what's your ideal depth? And I'm talking about not the. So if you think of a long rectangle, it's not going to be the long length that you're going to have your terraces facing the street. It's going to be the depth of that block under R2.
This is the most dangerous thing with going CDC in an LMR area under R2 or R1. And just to be clear, R4, all bets are off. You cannot use a low-rise housing diversity code. You are R4. There is no CDC on that land. Forget about it. All you can do CDC is a house and granny flat. There is no there's no dual locks and terraces via R4. CDC. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the minimum lot width? What's the depth of the block under R2?
Sorry. For terraces
on a corner block.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So basically, you do the numbers in reverse now. So you just need to make sure that you've got a substantial first floor. It's your first floor that's generally the concerning. Mm-hmm. And so you would do average setback of neighbours. Now, if all your neighbours are set back 10 metres, you've got problems. And so it's the neighbours that are within 40 metres of the site. When you're doing a house CDC, you're just checking for houses next door, or semi-detached dwellings or attached dwellings. So subdivided dual locks or subdivided terraces. They're where you pick up. If someone owns a boarding house next door, you ignore. If someone owns townhouses next door, you ignore. Mm-hmm. There for the average setback. If you're in the dual occupancy space, you are now doing the exact same stuff you check for houses plus dual locks. If you're in the terrace home space, they're then picking up multi-dwelling housing and a few other little things. So you just got to read the clauses. They change slightly per check. But once you're going in the bulk of the residential zone stuff gets picked up in the terrace space. And then what happens is it's the average setback of that. And so even though box tick and it looks all great that you're going to be good for CDC, you don't get the default 3.5 metre front setback in the R1 and R3 zones, R2 zones.
Yep. Spion. So you get the average.
Get the average.
What about rear?
Rear then is still the same rear, so 3 metres for ground and 8 if the block's less than 900. Mm-hmm. And as soon as the block goes 900 or more, you then need 5 and 12. And I think if you hit the 1500 mark, it then changes again and gets even worse.
Yeah.
But by the time you're 1,500, most blocks are deep and wide and sort of function.
Is there anything else we can touch on for this policy? No doubt, as you said, when you started and this policy got announced, your phones are off the hook. You had plenty of people calling you. What's some of the questions you're getting, some of the queries you're getting from everyone? I know you guys did the 6-part series online.
Yep.
But what's some of the questions about sites that you're getting?
So some of the stuff that I didn't cover in the 6-part series that people did ask was, I'm currently got an existing dual lock that unsubdivided, and I've been told that these new provisions allow subdivision. Now, the new provisions have been worded in such a way that say, if you proposed your dual lock using these provisions, you can then subdivide your dwelling, but because you didn't use it, you don't actually get the dual occupancy provisions.
Okay. So nothing existing.
Nothing existing. So if you get an existing dual lock, you can't use those provisions for the purposes.
Interesting. Anything else?
There's a lot of noise around that the layer may be sort of ignored. It needs to be tested. No one wants to know what's happening, especially with even the DCP controls. So as an example, when you're doing a residential flat building, it actually says you don't need a frontage and you don't even need an area. You technically could propose a residential flat building on a 2 metre wide site with 3 square metres of land. The council can't refuse you on block size. But in order to do a residential flat building in New South Wales, it actually asks you to use the Apartment Design Guide, the ADG.
Yeah.
And that starts asking for 6 metre setbacks, 9 metre setbacks, and all these things. Interesting thing is, our office, we don't do residential flat buildings, that sort of space. But in the TOD SEP, at the end of it, it says everything you're doing in the TOD must reference the Apartment Design Guide. In the Low-Rise Housing Diversity Code, it doesn't have that same clause. But the SEP housing, it used to be SEP 65, it's moved into SEP housing, where it talks about the Apartment Design. It actually says if you're doing a residential flat building, you need to use it. So I don't think there's a way of bypassing it personally, but it could be. Like I said, I'm not in that space, but it's concerning because the block technically should stack up, but the code will then knock you out from actually complying and working with it. So I'm sure there's going to be a few developers taking it out to court, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of case law around how these things to be treated. But like I said, in an ideal scenario, a code gets released for LMR sites, and that's it. You just follow those LMR codes across the board. So councils, out of council's hands for what happens, because it's, as you know, they'll just come up with anything and everything.
Yeah, that's
They'll
true.
get you up on overshadowing, and I'm like, yeah.
I mean, it's. I don't think the people listening to this are particularly going to be, and it's more complex to get into that apartment and those sorts of sites and numbers. I think the real value in here is going to be into a lot of the low-rise stuff. It's probably not for your entry-level developers and people to worry about. I think there's some people that are going to pick up this and know what we're talking about and the complexity of it, but also the value. And I think one of the best opportunities that has presented itself to developers or people that have a couple of years of experience that know sort of how all this stuff works. Is there anything else sort of, I'm just looking conscious of time, closing thoughts, is there any more sort of knowledge or any nuggets that you want to put in there? We touched on one before. Maybe we can end on that.
So similar to the other nugget for dual locks, the same thing applies in the terrace space. And so I'll pick an area so that let's say you were in the Hills, Shire Council. They talk about R1, R3 and R4 townhouse sites requiring 1,800 square metres of land, because they never anticipated in the R2 zone that multi-dwelling housing was going to be permissible. The second you're in an LMR area, it then forces permissibility into the R2 zone. CDC goes as far as saying, go check what the SEP's saying, and if the SEP's asking for a number, if the LEP is asking for a number, then that number. If the LEP doesn't ask for a number and it's permissible, then default to 600.
So LMR makes it permissible, and it's the number's not in there because it's not.
Because they've gone so specific to say R1, R3, and R4, and so my opinion is it's missing the R2, and because it's missing the R2, then it says the area required for multi-dwelling housing in the environmental planning instrument applicable to that land not just because sometimes it says in the environmental planning instrument, and it's just the lowest number in the environmental planning instrument, not applicable to the land. But it's applicable to the land, and the land is R2. And the R2 then, and it says excluding, because then people go, well, then why can't I do 500? But then it excludes the new LMR provisions. So in the hills, R2, you would trigger off. But as you know, frontage is now you're in 21 metre world for CDC, and you're 200 square metres for Torrens title, 180 square metres for strata. You're in the typical CDC provisions, and then what we covered before about the 900 square metres.
Okay.
But that's just one example. There's a lot of other gaps in the code all over the place.
Yeah. We might talk about them offline. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. So there's the other thing is if you're anyone trying to do CDC in those spaces, it's extremely dangerous because I have to tick every single box for LMR, like 200 meters from a relevant pipeline, bushfire, flooding. There's all these boxes to tick. I then tick all those boxes. I'm all good. I then have to go into the CDC world and tick all the boxes. As you know, CDC is non-discretionary standards. I cannot apply my discretion to any control. It must be that or it's not on.
Yeah.
So every single box must be ticked. So you can imagine how thorough our checking has to be. You can't miss a beat on things. And so sometimes it's extremely dangerous moving into the space, but the risk versus rewards there. And when you're talking, I'd rather spend an extra day doing a check than have my application in council for 6 months as a DA. Yeah.
I mean, that's the beauty of it, right? The CDC's to bypass council, and I think with this stuff coming on board, there's going to be a lot of new applications in councils. They may not know how to review and deal with them, so that might push out times even more. Whereas CDC, it's just like private certifier. You can get it approved in 2 weeks. It's a yes or a no. It's a box tick. There's no grey area and opinion and all that kind of stuff that come into it. This is why I love them.
Yeah. Yes, 100%.
Elie, I appreciate you joining us. I appreciate your wisdom. I will put in the show notes details to your website. This man has the world's best phone number, world's smallest, shortest website, email address. I'll put them all in I'll put them in the show notes so people can contact you. But please tell me this time around, what is a quote you live your life by?
All right, so it's a quote that a late uncle of mine had told me in early 2000s, and it's your friends are like perfume, and people in your life are like perfume. Drink them and you will die. Smell them and they smell lovely. And your aim in life is to work out how much time to spend with each person, because some people you can see once a week and they're perfectly fine, but have more of them, it's like drinking them and you'll die. Some people you can see once a month, some people you'll see once every 6 months. But if you go through every single person in life, every single person smells nice. So some people I will see once a year and we have the best catch up. I can't see them more than once a year. There are friends and they've become extremely rare, the ones that you can see daily. And so your aim in life is to just work out what dose of each person to actually get, because every single person has a nice part to them.
That's nice, man. That's deep. I wasn't expecting something like that from you.
It's one of my favourite quotes, yeah.
I appreciate it. Well, look, Elie Sleiman, appreciate you coming on Everything Property Podcast. That is the LMR breakdown, and stay tuned in this space, I reckon. There's more work and there's more content to come from us.